Alrighty, so I did the book We Have Not Been Moved, Resisting Racism and Militarism in 21st Century America. And the book is edited by Elizabeth Martinez, Matt Meyer, and Mandy Carter. So it's not all one piece. It's a collection of many different pieces, such as essays, dialogues, interviews. There's even poetry as well as photographs that are included in this book. So for example, on page 171, there is a photo of a Japanese American Relocation Center post office. So it has the where it was, but then in the following pages there's a poem that addresses the photograph and addresses Japanese internment as well. So in the introduction of the book, the editors describe the purpose of the book to as the editors wanted to tie together connections between the evils of militarism and racism to provide examples of this and how these ideas can be combated. So the book is divided into 6 sections. So section 1 is connections, contexts, and challenges. So it sort of sets the stage for the pieces that will be following throughout the next sections. So it includes dialogues with Martin Luther King Jr. and Dorothy Day. And section 2 is redefining racism and militarism. So how do we define things like militarism and racism and who defines them? Section 3 is chicken and eggs. War, race, and class, and it gives a broader context of the different organizational ties and campaigns to combat racism and militarism. Sections 4 and 5 are the roots and routes of war. So section 4 deals with patriarchy and heterosexism, and then section 5 deals with nationalism, ageism, and religion, and the different struggles of all these different components when dealing with the broader context of racism and militarism. And then section 6 is where do we go from here, and it centers on organizing, presenting, and showing how folks are engaging in ongoing work. So some of the strengths that I found in the book is that due to the very diverse nature of the book itself is definitely a strength. So there are many different authors as well as different time frames that are written in each piece. There's writings from the 1950s up until 2011, and the book was published in 2012. So it deals with all kinds of different things. So it deals with the war in Vietnam and today, like the WTO riots in Seattle, all kinds of stuff. There's also different races, genders, and backgrounds that are represented with the authors as well as in the pieces themselves. And another thing that I really liked about the book was the authors aren't afraid to critique other authors. So in the introduction, the editors critique the Obama administration, as well as there's another piece in here called Looking at the White Working Class Historically. And that one is, I'm just going to find it really quickly. That one's written by David Gilbert, and he critiques all kinds of different thinkers, as well as looking at the struggles of the white working class and militarism and racism through a Marxist lens, so more of like a class struggle. So you get a lot of different lenses throughout the book. So you have Marxism, you have like feminist lenses, all kinds of different ones. And in the Gilbert piece, he critiques W.E.B. Du Bois. And so I thought that that was really interesting that the different authors are not afraid to critique other thinkers and to be like, this person had this great idea, however, it can be worked in a different way. So another thing that I liked about the book is that even though it was published in 2012, I feel like there was a lot that has happened since 2012 to today, especially with the election of Trump, and a lot of these pieces, especially the Gilbert piece, can be tied to things that we're seeing today with the backlash after the Obama administration and with the election of Trump. And there are also different ideas that we can use for today. So for example, there is a piece in here by Ted Glick that is called On Being a Good Anti-Racist Ally. And I feel like that is definitely something that, especially as someone who's not a person of color, that was something that I found kind of interesting to look at. Because, you want to be a good anti-racist ally, but you don't want to be stepping on too many toes. But that's actually something that Teglick addresses in this piece. So I'm going to read you a short little quote from the book, or from the piece. Liberal paternalism is keeping quiet when a person of color says something that you strongly disagree with or proposes a course of action you feel is wrong. It is going along to get along, being afraid to engage in frank and upfront, well-respectful discussion over important issues instead of deferring too easily to the viewpoint of persons of color you're talking with out of fear of being thought of as too pushy or arrogant. So I definitely, that excerpt really struck me because in a way, I agree and I disagree with it, because I do agree that we should be having these tough conversations with everybody. However, I feel like it's also important to sort of address your own privilege when it comes to talking about these certain issues, and kind of also taking that into account, which kind of leads into some of the weaknesses that I found in the book. So the book is kind of intimidating when you first pick it up. It's over 500 pages, and the font fills the entire page. So I feel like for a person that's just walking in near Barnes & Noble and sees this book and picks it up and kind of flips through it, they might immediately put it down because it's quite intimidating to hold and to look through. However, when you do actually pick it up and start reading through the different pieces, it is very accessible to your average reader. All of the ideas are put forth very clearly, some better than others, which I found was another weakness in the book, is that some of the passages, such as there's a piece in here called We Have Not Been Moved, and it's actually written by one of the editors of the book. It's written by Matt Meyer, and initially this piece was not intended for publication, and you can kind of tell, like, maybe it needed like another couple rounds through the editor, because some of the sentences were a little bit run on and could have used a little bit more editing, I felt. But the ideas were there. It just needed to be cleaned up a little bit. And I also felt that this book would be good in a classroom setting, which can also be seen as a weakness, because it is something that the relationship between racism and militarism is something that we should be discussing also outside the classroom setting. So I feel like if it only works in a classroom setting, that's kind of an issue. Especially, I think this book would be good in a class like this, because you could select little pieces to assign as like a weekly reading or something to get different perspectives. Yeah. Any questions?
Since there are so many so many pieces, was it hard to pick out a common theme? Was there a common theme?
Yeah, so the common themes all kind of revolved around racism, and especially looking at militarism and protest and different ways of combating that, especially nonviolent as well. So, and the way that they kind of sectioned off all of the different 6 sections was, I thought, a pretty successful way, because it's such a broad topic that you kind of have to break it down a little bit, but there is always that common theme. Yeah.
Did you have a favorite piece?
I really liked the piece. There's a piece in here that is We Need Women's Actions and Feminist Voices for Peace by Starhawk. I really liked that piece, as well as the piece about the WTO riots in Seattle. I'm from Seattle, and but I don't think I wasn't born yet for the WTO riots, and because those happened in '91, the WTO riots.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. And it kind of addresses why some of these protests and some of the anti-protests of Vietnam were predominantly white. And so kind of addressing that issue, I thought that was really interesting, because you're like, oh yeah.
Got 20 seconds, one more question?
Oh yeah, I really liked that you sort of brought up that issue of how to be an ally and whether or not you disagreed with that. Was there anything else in the book that sort of struck you, like you weren't sure if you agreed with it, or something that didn't feel good?
Mostly that one, but most of them I could get where people were coming from, and I liked that.
Cool. Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Yeah. Should I pause the recording or keep it going?
Yeah, let's pause that so they'll be each separate, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.